Alright, hello everybody. Welcome back to the How to Program with Java blog. Today's Java tutorial will be on debugging, as promised. Debugging is a really helpful way to figure out if you have any bugs in your program, figure out where they're coming from, and give you a better idea of how you can go about fixing them. I use this every day at my job. It's something that every single programmer needs to know how to do and really know how to do well. So I'm going to teach you how it is that I go about using the debugger in Spring STS in my daily job. That way you can hit the ground running and figure out your own bugs if you happen to create them in your programs. So here I have a little test program that you might have seen in my last post about exceptions. Slightly modified, but we'll get the basic gist of what's going on here. So in our runnable class has our main method where we instantiate a new file IO Java class that we've created here, file IO Java. It will instantiate it with the constructor that uses a string as an input. So if you go to file IO, we'll see that we have a public file IO, which is the constructor, and it takes a string as a parameter. So we know this is what's going to be called. So in order to debug, there's two things you need to do. First one is set up an actual debug breakpoint, and that's this little blue guy here. You can actually double click right there, and you see it goes away, or double click on the line there, and it comes back. I think you can even right-click on it, and you can toggle it on and off, same kind of thing. I mean, it's your own choice, your own preference. I prefer to double-click, but I mean, it's up to you. Also, I put another one in my file IO here on line 16. Why did I choose line 16? Well, you try to double-click on line 13, and it won't let you because you can't put a breakpoint on a line where you're just declaring a variable. Don't ask me why. I probably should know the answer, but it's not really that important at this point. So I just put my breakpoint here on this line in the try block. So that's the first thing you need to know. The second thing you need to know is how to start the program in debug mode. So you're all familiar with the main class, and you right-click on it and you say run as Java application. But this time, instead of using the run as Java application, we're going to choose debug as Java application. So when I click on Java application under debug as and let it run, it switches into a different perspective. This is called the debug perspective, which you'll see over here, debug perspective. Really, this is just a different view of your code that allows you to better debug. So it's just an easier way to go about debugging. It shows you your variables over here and any threads that your program may be running in or rather paused in here, as well as your regular console output that you're used to at the bottom. So as you can see, we ran our program in debug mode, and we have now a highlighted green line which indicates that the Java code is actually paused and waiting to execute this line of code. So, okay, that's cool. How do we actually tell it to execute that line of code? Well, up here is our, I guess, controls that allow us to control the flow of our debug. So, here we just have the resume button, so if I click this, it will essentially run the code until either it hits another breakpoint or until the execution completes. Terminate, that's pretty self-explanatory. It'll just stop the debug mode, and it'll actually terminate the program right where you are. So it won't actually execute any more code. It'll just stop, exit, nothing more will happen. Now here we have step into. Now this one I don't use too frequently because sometimes you'll get into nitty-gritty code of Java. You'll get into the actual Java class files. I could probably show you what that's like, but I don't want to do it just yet. I use it sparingly. Typically, I use step over, which means execute this line of code and just move on to the next line. So if I do that now, if I click step over, what it's going to do is execute this entire line of code, which will in turn instantiate this class. Now, upon instantiation of this class, the code will have to go into the constructor of the file IO class and execute the code inside of the constructor. Well, that's exactly what we looked at over here in the file IO. This public file IO is the constructor, and this code here is everything that's inside of that constructor. Since we've put a breakpoint right here at line 16, the code should stop at line 16. So let's see if that's what actually happens. Let's go back to our line here. I'm going to click on step over, and there you go. So now the code has executed the instantiation of our file IO constructor. It's declared our buffer reader, and it's executed the first part of the try block, and now we're sitting and waiting to instantiate a buffered reader and then instantiate a file reader with the file name that we're passing in. So in debug mode, a real bonus here is that we can hover over our variables and it'll actually show us what the value of that variable is. Let me just bring that up. There you go. So we set the value of the variable based on the parameter that we passed in to this constructor, which we saw back in the my program. So I actually hard-coded it as cdrive/afile.txt. So I'm going to go ahead and step over this line, and something interesting will happen. And let's see what happens. So let's step over, and you would have expected it to go to this next line, but instead it jumped into our catch block. Now, why did it do that? Well, that's because right now in my current configuration, I don't have afile.txt stored in the C drive at all. This file doesn't exist. So what happens? Well, it's going to throw an exception. So Java will throw an exception, and since we have this line wrapped inside of our try block, it will then go into the catch block, and it will catch the file not found exception. So we have a file not found exception that we've actually assigned to a variable name of E. And again, like I said, in debug mode, you can hover over your variables, and it'll show you everything there is to know about that particular variable. So we see that it's a file not found exception. We see a detail message saying cdrive/afile, the system cannot find the file specified, and we have a cause and all that stuff. So that's just, it's helpful to know exactly where the problem came from. And this line here, e.print stack trace, will just output the all the pertinent information about the error into our console. So if I step over this guy, like so, you'll see at the bottom here, now we have all of this information regarding our exception. So, really handy stuff, the debugger. So now I'll just say resume and let it execute the rest of the code. So now the code flows out into completion, and you see now that the thread is terminated and we're done. So this is a very simple example of how to debug, but it's such a powerful tool, and I can't overstate how important it is to know how to use the debugger. Now, real quick before we finish here, I just want to show you what the step into does. So I'm going to go back and do the exact same thing as I did before. Right click on the main method, go to debug as, and debug it as a Java application. So we have our breakpoint here set for the first line as we had before. And instead I'm going to go into the step into, and you'll see what happens when I click on this. We've now gone into a class loader.class file, which is part of the Java lang package. Not very helpful to us. This is, code, I guess, written by the people who made Java, and the possibility of their code breaking is very slim. So it gets really complicated, and if you keep stepping into these classes, I mean it just comes to a point where I don't even have this Java or these Java docs loaded, so I don't have the sun.miscellaneous package on my computer that it can attach to. So this is what I get. So I just wanted to show you how that is not always the greatest thing unless you know exactly where you're going to be stepping into. And if you know exactly where it's going to be, then it becomes helpful. Like I said, generally not helpful when it's going to be the core Java code. So let me just let this resume out. And now, once we let it run through, it will have instantiated our file IO class. And now we're back to familiar territory, which we've already seen. So I'll let that run through, and we get the same result. So if I were to add this file to the right location, hopefully we'll see something different in the code. So let me just go on to my desktop here. I just renamed it to text2, so now I'll rename it to text and say yes. And I'll rerun the program in debug mode. So right click here, debug as, Java application. I'm going to either, I could say step over or resume, doesn't really matter because I have that second breakpoint. If I resume, I get here. So now the file should exist there. So let me step over this one. And there you go. So now if we hover over our buffered reader, we have some stuff. And we're able to keep on stepping over. Now we get into our while loop, and you'll see that it goes to the first system.out with the line that's been read from the file, which is this is the line 1 from file, and we say step over again, and we'll see some console output. So this is a very good way to understand how your code flows. Very useful. I love it. Great way to learn how Java works. Okay, great. So that brings us to the end of our little tutorial here. Please, if you can, take some time to click our share buttons on the left-hand side of the screen. If you're watching this on YouTube, then follow my link back to my howtoprogramwithjava.com website. If you're on my website, then please, by all means, share. I really appreciate it, and I thank you guys very much. And I can't wait to see you next time. Take care.